I'm going to tell you this story. It's about the Napolitano brothers down in Florida, South Florida, and Abbandando, this guy Abbandando. So it's a crime story, but I want you to consider this as I read this to you, that I did as I wrote this. You know what this is? This is traumatized human beings traumatizing other people. They grew up kids and neglected. Nobody really gave a damn one way or the other about them. And they grew up lost, traumatized and lost, and that's how they died. One is in prison for life, and two others are killed through basically being traumatized, if you think about it. But anyway, so there's this book it's called Bones on the Beach by Peter Davidson. And he identifies Aniello Napolitano, who was called Neil, and Rocco Napolitano, who called himself anyway Remo, as the sons of Sonny Black Napolitano up in New York. So if you have a problem with them being identified as sons, get hold of Peter and tell him, not me. The boys were born in Jersey City when their mother lived at, I did some research to make sure I was right about this, at 107 Congress Street. They moved to Miami when they were very, very young. Something dramatic happened because they were placed in foster care at ages 6 and 7. They stayed there till they were 10 and 11. They were fostered by this guy, Norberto Gispert. And after 4 years, they were returned to their mother's care. They took the surname Byrne. I don't think that was the mother's surname. I think that I don't know, she remarried. And so John Rocco Napolitano, as an example, went through his teen years as John Byrne before changing his name to Napolitano. There's a saying in Latin, more Irish than the Irish themselves. So I'm going to change that around a little bit. Forgive my pronunciation. In Italian, P Italiano di Gli, Italiano stessi. The Napolitano boys became more Italian than the Italians themselves, which you should do. I mean, well, you shouldn't go that far, but you should know your roots. It's a good, healthy thing. You can learn a lot, especially if you're Italian. My God, look at the inheritance. Uh, I mean, the Roman Empire, democracy goes on to the Republic. And then there's the culture. It's a warm culture. They take care of their families and all that. But somewhere along the line, these guys didn't have anybody in their around them to tell them, yeah, be proud to be an Italian, but be proud of the right things. You know, they missed that, and so they became proud of being related to a mob guy who was murdered in New York. It's kind of sad. I understand it, but it's sad. So eventually, the brothers became partners with Frank Abbandando Jr. They called him Fingers. He was a steroid guy. He sold steroids on illegal steroids down in South Florida. They call him Fingers. There's one of three reasons. I don't know which is true. He gave he gave the finger to a Bonanno captain who cut his finger off. He cheated somebody on a deal. He didn't come through with all the money, cut his finger off. The third story says that, and this is from a guy named Joe Dogs Iannusa, who wrote a book called Joe Dogs, which I read, I think. It's pretty good, as I recall. But anyway, there's a picture of Joe Dogs here on this thing, and you'll be able to see. His story is that Paul Vario, the boss from, I'm sure you saw Goodfellas, the actual boss of that mob was that family that there was Paul Vario, who's a big fat guy. Anyway, he, according to Joe Dogs, ordered that the finger be cut off because it was this tangled mess dealing with marijuana or something. I don't know the details. So apparently, Abbandando Jr. had really pissed off this guy, John Matira, called Johnny Irish, Fort Lauderdale-based member of the Colombo crime family. And this is what Joe Dog says. So Paulie Barrio sent word to Johnny Irish to chop Junior's finger off and send it to him. By the way, Joe Dogs, who was a former Gambino associate, would go on to testify in 12 mafia trials against the mob. Um, so it says soon afterwards in a Broward restaurant, Johnny Irish gave Junior a beating right on the table, and he got a knife. It wasn't even sharp, and he cut his finger off, and it got back to Paulie in vinegar, a vinegar bottle, I guess. He said, I used to tease Junior. I says, geez, it doesn't cost you much to get a manicure, does it? His father, Junior's father, was Frank the Dasher Abbandando. He was a hitman for Murder Inc. He was the other part of him you don't hear too much about it. He was a a swaggering bully, really. Just he wore these incredibly flashy clothes and he drove big, expensive cars. He didn't make that much money being with, but he killed 40 people in a 10-year period, according to the city of New York. But he didn't make that much money at murdering. None of them did. They were paid a pittance. He made his money freelancing, doing robberies, I suppose, or whatever it is. But when he was finally arrested, the arrest for the murder that had him electrocuted, he told the press, "You don't got me. I'm going to be eating spaghetti at home on Sunday." Well, no, he wasn't. He was executed on February 19th, 1942. He was only 32 years old in the electric chair. He had ice picked a guy named George Whitey Rudnick, who was a loan shark, but was suspected of being a police informant. So he took an ice pick and cut him up. Wow. So Abbandando Jr. was 6 years old when this happened. He fell off to the side very early. Abbandando Jr. He got involved with a street gang up in New York. He got locked up for having a loaded gun when he was 16. He pulled out his pocket and the cop saw it. And instead of handing it over, he pondered apparently whether or not he should shoot the cop, or he pointed it towards the cop. The cop took it from him. He got arrested for having a loaded .22 in 1962. New York has a Sullivan law. They take it very seriously. You can't have, I don't know if it's still in effect, but yeah, you can't have no gun in New York. So that was in 1962. He also got locked up for gambling. But, you know, he was still in New York, and considering the bad guy he would become, it was a modest record. But still, he was a very young man. Then he moved to South Florida. Everything changed. In quick succession, he got locked up for extortion, assault, grand larceny, a weapons offense, threatening, and it goes on and on. This is in the early 70s, by the way. So he's down in South Florida, and he's bouncing between the Lucchese's, the Colombos, the Gambino crime families, loans himself out. This is the part I don't understand, as an enforcer for mostly he worked with the Lucchese family. So he's an enforcer, but I don't know. I could be wrong about this, but my information says I'm looking at the police thing. He's 5'4". Yeah, I mean, and 5'4". Who knows? You know. Anyway, he's a very rough guy. The police record on the jacket, it says he loved to wear zipper down jogging suits, orange, pink, and blue, bright blue. Showed off his hair chest. He wore gold, gold necklaces they used to wear, if you're old enough to remember that. He spoke in a gravel voice, and according to police, his reputation was fearsome in loan sharking and in drug trafficking. He worked out of a storefront called Roland's Estate Outlets, where basically was just nothing more than a high-risk, high-interest loan that he gave out there. And then it also, according to police, was a front for illegal gambling, narcotics, fencing, that kind of stuff. He had one conviction in 1983 for selling his specialty, and this is what brought him to the attention of the police. He was selling bootleg Quaaludes. Quickly, the cops came after him. They got him again on a loan sharking investigation. Now, in that case, William Darden, who was the chief of police of Riviera Beach, Florida, got sentenced to 6 years because he was selling police protection for this gambling operation. You know, they'd beat some guy up for not paying. The guy go to the cops, and the cops said, "I don't know, it's too bad." So that got Abbandando put in prison. He gets out of prison, and he partners up with this guy, Gerald Francis Chili, who was a captain apparently in the Bonanno crime family thing, I understand. Then Neil Napolitano and Abbandando, they met because they both hung out at this really sleazy place called Party Girls. It's a nudie bar on 11340 Biscayne Boulevard. Eddie, Abbandando's son, worked there. Neil Napolitano, who, by the way, was a one-time youth explorer with the Miami police, I guess it's like a junior police thing, he was basically despite what he thought of himself, he was a two-bit drug dealer. And he was a braggart. You know, he would tell my dad and blah, blah, blah. But the police just had him pegged as a steroid trafficker, which is really sort of low on the totem pole of crime in their view. And by the time of his death, investigators said he was, quote, nothing more than a serious mobster wannabe. But now, with that said, He was suspected in the murder of two Miami Beach men, Elvino Reyes and John Davidson. They vanished in mid-December 1994. They were walking on the beach to a place called Wolfie's Restaurant, and they never got there. No one knows what happened to them. They had been involved in the steroid business with Neil Napolitano. He got paranoid, thought they were talking to the cops, and that was that. They've never found those bodies, by the way. So now he's on the radar. Metro-Dade police had him on the radar. So they send this detective, a woman, Rosalind Vargas, to go undercover, meet Napolitano, try to win him over. Not only should win him over, they begin sleeping together, intimate with each other. So Vargas was the policewoman was so swept away that she introduced Napolitano. She's married, by the way, to a policeman. She introduced him to her children. She took him in the police department. Then it all came to an end. September 1996, bits and parts of Napolitano start to wash ashore. So there's a lot of questions. Why? They think Abbandando did it because he was disloyal, because Napolitano had been disloyal. Maybe he was in the drug business, so maybe he cheated somebody. The last person he saw was Vargas, the policewoman. He saw her at a restaurant on the night he disappeared. They left at 7 p.m. 2 hours later, somebody saw him back at the strip bar Party Girls, and that's that. Then, of course, bits of him start to wash up, hip here, an elbow there, start washing up in the shore. Police did check to see if maybe it was a jealous husband. That didn't work out. So Vargas and her husband were suspects in the murder. But what they think happened is, not two things probably led to this. Napolitano started to sidestep Abbandando and work closely with this guy, Fred Massaro, who was in the mafia. He was reported to be with he was with the mafia. And that Napolitano wanted to be his full-time bodyguard, his muscle guy. One time he beat up a guy. He kicked the guy's head, according to this, across a lounge after Massaro had trouble collecting from the guy. Massaro went to dinner with this at the Villa Peron with Napolitano and the policewoman Vargas. It's not sure if Massaro understood she was a cop, but with him was this guy, Anthony Pep Transtacata, who's a mob guy in the Gambino family, active in Atlanta. When they came later and said, "Did you know you had dinner with a cop?" And he said, "No, we didn't know that. We didn't. Doesn't matter. We're all straight, honest guys." And so, but he said he was terribly shocked. Both him and Mr. Transtacata were shocked at Napolitano's murder. Okay, so right at this point, Rocco Napolitano, his brother, who grew up, as I said, as John Byrne in Miami Beach, he changed his name to Remo Napolitano. I don't know where Remo came from. He said he was up in New York selling steroids. He said that he was not comfortable with his brother going out with this cop, and he told him, he said, "Why are you crazy? This is going to get you killed." Anyway, one detective said somehow Neil Napolitano got somebody very angry. Neil thought he was a tough guy. Maybe he wanted to see how much he can get away with. He got killed in a very deliberate way, which meant to send a message, and whoever killed him knew him and knew him well. He wasn't the kind of guy who was going to let just anybody get close to him. Well, what happened was Rocco Napolitano figured Abbandando did it, and he may have. Here's one investigator said Junior Abbandando was one of those rare guys who would just as easily do an impulse killing as a contract killing. He would take it on himself, the contract, and he'd do the dirty deed. He always had a reputation for being a vicious killer. FBI agent Jack Bonino, I hope I pronounced that right, I should, who went undercover to infiltrate the South Florida mob in 1981-82, he recalled Abbandando as, quote, a dangerous little guy. He could hurt you. When you looked at the way Abbandando, presented himself, he just never fit. He was on the seamier side of criminality. There are some guys who are nicer looking. You could take them out. Junior always looked like he just crawled out of a sewer. Joe, by the way, that agent, let me get his name again. Benino, he's the guy that turned Joe Dogs and became a police informant. What happened was Joe Dogs had been beaten badly with a baseball bat, and Benino got a $25,000 through, as announced, got a $25,000 mob loan to set up the Revere Beach Bottle Club. That was to be a front for illegal gambling. Operation Home Run was called. Ultimately nailed that police chief I told you about, Abbandando, and a half dozen other guys too. So during a secretly taped meeting to negotiate a Shylock loan, Abbandando's primary purpose was to serve as a menacing muscle for Gambino chieftain Andrew Fat Andy Ruggiano, I guess, who was his Miami-based mentor. Frank's brother was Larry Abbandando, by the way, and he was known as Larry Larry Bacala. His mother owned a store that sold bacala. It's a fish. It's like a dried, I know it as a dried fish. One of the two, Larry was closer to Fat Andy than Frank Jr. was. Joe Dog said Fat Andy and Jr. were both butchers. They chop up your body. Jr. was a protege of Fat Andy. Fat Andy says to whack somebody, Jr. would do it right then, right there. That's what kind of a moron he was. Wow. So Abbandando was gunned down on the Biscayne Boulevard, December 22, by Rocco Napolitano. He was driving down Biscayne Boulevard in his truck, a pickup truck, and he sees Abbandando walking along the sidewalk. He was trying to cross the street apparently. So he swerved and he ran Abbandando down first. Then he got out of the car and he shot the guy 5 times in the face. And he didn't run away, he just denied it, but he did cut a deal, so he pleaded to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. He said, I killed a man who brutally murdered my brother and was looking to murder me. Napolitano told the court.
Oh, it's terrible.
I went to law enforcement for help.
I can't believe it.
A consensus amid new clues about the human remains spotted between 16th and 54th Streets on Miami Beach. A pelvis and whole right leg were the first parts found. Then a left thigh inside these designer jeans. Later, an upper arm, shoulder, and collarbone behind the Fontainebleau Hilton Hotel. Then a condo owner made a 4th discovery.
So I focused the telescope. I had a telescope there, and I saw bones. So I called 911.
She was scanning the sea after the televised reports.
It appears at this point that we may be putting an individual together.
The bones, bleached yellow by the sea, showed no shark bites and had not been in the water for more than a few days, according to an Associate Dade medical examiner. It's believed the bones are from one person. He says a male, 5'10" to 6'2" tall, in his late 20s to mid-30s, with light hair and a 34-inch waist. That's known because of these jeans whose pockets were empty. It's now hoped that the teeth and the jawbone can be matched with dental records so an identification can be made. Beach police have also started a homicide investigation. That's standard procedure.
And in one that we don't have a clear direction, we need to start at the maximum level, and then we de-escalate as we continue to gain information.
A forensic anthropologist from the University of Florida is being asked to study the bones. What is known is that a body can come apart easily once the joints decompose and the ocean's waves batter it.
Aniello Napolitano was born Danny Byrne in Jersey City, New Jersey. Sources tell us he wanted desperately to be a so-called made man with the mafia. So after moving to South Florida, he adopted his father's name, Aniello Napolitano. Aniello means lamb in Italian. Investigators find that ironic for a man they describe as utterly ruthless. Up until his bones washed up on Miami Beach, we've learned Napolitano had been under investigation by Miami Beach and Metro-Dade police, as well as the FBI, that he boasted connections to the mob, and that he was a suspect in home invasion robberies, disappearances, and the sale of steroids. We've learned Metro assigned a respective detective, Ross Vargas, to go undercover in the investigation of Napolitano. But at some point, our sources say, she got too close, and the two had an affair. We've learned Vargas and her husband, also a Metro police officer, went to Orlando a few weeks ago for a family funeral, but they had a spirited argument. She called Napolitano, who went to Orlando. On September 11th, Vargas and Napolitano returned home. The following day, Vargas went to work and confessed to the affair with her supervisors. The next day, she was reassigned in her duty. That is also the last day anyone saw Napolitano alive. 2 weeks later, his bones washed up on Miami Beach.
Alvino Reyes and John Davidson lived in the Adam Taylor apartment complex until last December, when they simply vanished.
Just took a walk. They said they were going, somebody told me they were going to Wolfie's for a sandwich. Never returned.
But the I-Team has learned investigators believe what happened here is directly linked to this man, 24-year-old Aniello Napolitano. It was Napolitano's bones that were found on Miami Beach last month. As the I-Team first told you, Napolitano, who bragged of his ties to the mob, was under investigation by Metro-Dade police. Then, in a bizarre twist, Napolitano had an affair with a detective who was working undercover investigating him. Shortly after that affair became known, Napolitano's bones began washing ashore. It was last December that Napolitano's name was linked to the two men who vanished from this quiet hotel on the beach.
Two relatively quiet, innocuous residents here in the complex.
We've learned DEA agents and Miami Beach police were watching as a package was delivered here to the two men who vanished.
It's about the time they disappeared. Supposedly, I don't know that a package was delivered. I don't know what the content of the package was.
But the I-Team has learned that package was a shipment of illegal steroids. When investigators moved in on Reyes and Davidson, they said they were just holding the steroids for a friend named Neil Napolitano. The two cooperated with police, telling them what they knew of Napolitano. Just before Christmas, that cooperation ended when Reyes and Davidson walked down the block to this delicatessen for lunch. They never returned and have never been seen or heard from since. I'm Rad Berkey, Channel 10 Eyewitness News on the Night Beat. Alvino Reyes and John Davidson lived in the Adam Taylor apartment complex until last December, when they simply vanished.
Just took a walk. They said they were going, somebody told me they were going to Wolfie's for a sandwich. Never returned.
But the I-Team has learned investigators believe what happened here is directly linked to this man, 24-year-old Aniello Napolitano. It was Napolitano's bones that were found on Miami Beach last month. As the I-Team first told you, Napolitano, who bragged of his ties to the mob, was under investigation by Metro-Dade police. Then, in a bizarre twist, Napolitano had an affair with a detective who was working undercover investigating him. Shortly after that affair became known, Napolitano's bones began washing ashore. It was last December that Napolitano's name was linked to the two men who vanished from this quiet hotel on the beach.
Two relatively quiet, innocuous residents here in the complex.
We've learned DEA agents and Miami Beach police were watching as a package was delivered here to the two men who vanished.
It's about the time they disappeared. Supposedly, I don't know that a package was delivered. I don't know what the content of the package was.
But the I-Team has learned that package was a shipment of illegal steroids. When investigators moved in on Reyes and Davidson, they said they were just holding the steroids for a friend named Neil Napolitano. The two cooperated with police, telling them what they knew of Napolitano. Just before Christmas, that cooperation ended when Reyes and Davidson walked down the block to this delicatessen for lunch. They never returned and have never been seen or heard from since. I'm Rad Berkey, Channel 10 Eyewitness News on the Night Beat.
Oh, what a story. I mean, if you had to concoct a story that would be a novel or whatever, this would be stranger than fiction.
Potential jurors admit it's a case they're fascinated by. Undercover Miami-Dade police officer Rosalind Vargas, who went undercover to nail steroid trafficker and mobster wannabe Neil Napolitano 4 years ago, instead became romantically involved with him. Weeks later, Napolitano's body parts washed up on Miami Beach, and Vargas, who's been suspended from the force, is now going to trial for perjury.
She's charged with committing perjury in a sworn statement taken relative to an investigation into the homicide of Neil Napolitano.
According to police depositions, Vargas admits to becoming personally involved with Napolitano, but when she crossed the line and under what circumstances are the basis for her perjury indictment.
It was on the TV news.
Weeding out potential jurors who know about the case and may have already formed an opinion shouldn't take long, because unless you followed it over the years, for some it could be confusing. Napolitano's murder, not at issue at this trial, was only one of a number of unsolved cases related to the mafia in South Florida. And while Vargas may have been the one closest to Napolitano before he was dismembered, she says she doesn't know who's responsible for his death. Napolitano's brother Rocco is in jail awaiting trial for gunning down a reputed mobster who he told police killed his brother.
Rocco Napolitano may soon find his only friends are the police who arrested him. Napolitano was picked up last Friday, just minutes after he allegedly shot reputed mobster Frank Abbandando outside a Biscayne Boulevard restaurant. Abbandando owns Party Girls, a strip bar just down the street. And Party Girls was the last place Napolitano's brother Neil, a mob wannabe, was seen alive. Neil Napolitano's bones washed up on Miami Beach a few weeks later, and many investigators believe it was Neil Napolitano's affair with a Metro-Dade detective that led to his death. Those same investigators now think it's likely Rocco believed Abbandando sanctioned his brother's killing and shot Abbandando to even the score. Abbandando, our sources say, is not a made member of the mob, but was a player, running loan sharking operations and dabbling in drugs. In 1983, he pleaded guilty to selling Quaaludes and was arrested 2 different times on charges of racketeering. In one of those cases, the chief of the Riviera Beach Police Department was convicted of selling protection for the loan sharking operation. Even in the underworld, there is a code of ethics, and Abbandando's death could mark Rocco Napolitano now as a target for revenge.
Count 1, guilty of perjury in an official proceeding.
Real quick. Nothing. Rosalind, anything?
What is known is that a body...
It was on the TV news. In the process of doing that, she became